Let us turn now to Psalm 130. Psalm 130. A song of degrees. Out of the depths have I cried unto thee, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let thine ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If thou, Lord, shouldest mark iniquities, O Lord, who shall stand? But there is forgiveness with thee, that thou mayest be feared. I wait for the Lord. My soul doth wait, and in his word do I hope. My soul waiteth for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. I say, more than they that watch for the morning. Let Israel hope in the Lord. For with the Lord there is mercy, and with him is plenteous redemption, and he shall redeem Israel from all his iniquities. You will notice that this psalm is called a song of degrees. Psalms 120 to 134 have this same title. A song of degrees, it can mean a song of ascents, meaning going up. And the title is appropriate for these psalms. For instance, in Psalm 122, it begins, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go up into the house of the Lord. And then verse 4, whither the tribes go up. And then Psalm 126, when the Lord turned again the captivity of Zion, we were like them that dreamed. And now there is that sense of going back up, because God brought a remnant back from Babylon to Jerusalem to go up to the city and to the land of Judah again at their restoration. And then Psalm 128, where we find this, blessed is everyone that feareth the Lord, that walketh in his ways. Blessed in the sense of raised up in God's favor. Here in Psalm 130, we find the psalmist in the depths, verse 1, and he prays that the Lord will deliver him out of the depths. And here is another kind of ascending, but no less needed. Love lifted me. 2 Lord's Days ago, we looked at the first part of the psalm, and this morning I would like us to consider the second part, especially in terms of that phrase we find in verse 5, I wait for the Lord. This is something that occurs around 50 times in the Old Testament, and the truth of it is very much in the New Testament. And it describes something that Christians must never fail to do. We often call it waiting on the Lord. And it describes an outlook in life which is unique to the believer, because it recognizes that the Lord is in everything, that he is graciously over our lives, and that we are dependent upon him, and that his will is always best. Only he can answer prayer, only he can help us, but more, he reserves the right to do these things in his time and way, so that we wait. and we have to wait upon the Lord. That is not an easy thing to do. We are naturally impatient, and we like to be in control because we feel safe then if things are in our hands. But it goes against the grain to wait upon the Lord because things are in his hands and under his control. But when we understand this and submit to it, it is a blessed thing. And I wonder this morning if we know rest in our souls. Or are you fretting about something? Are you impatient in spirit? Have you no peace? Well, this is the answer. Waiting for the Lord in a right way that brings that peace and brings that rest unto our souls. We have this phrase at least 5 times in the second part of Psalm 130, expressed in various ways. So as we look then at this, let us see what this gracious exercise of waiting upon the Lord is and how it is that we do it, what it is for. First of all, you can look at it in this way. For what do we wait? Well, you've got the answer here in the psalm, verses 1 and 2. We saw last time that the psalmist was in the depths, and from there he prays to the Lord. And it reminds us, as we mentioned, that there are soul depths as well as soul heights. And that it is no biblical representation of the Christian life to give the impression that you are always on the mountaintop and always full of joy and always having the victory. If that were the case, then we have to ask ourselves, what's wrong with these psalmists? What's wrong with Job? What's wrong with Elijah? What is wrong with the best of God's people who are often low in spirit and in a very low place for all kinds of reasons? It's not a wrong thing to be in the depths. But the thing to notice is that in the depths, he prays. Out of the depths have I cried unto thee. And that shows grace. And this is part of real religion. And it perhaps could be said that we never show the reality of grace in us more than when we are in a low place and we cry to God from that low place. That's not natural. We cry, but not necessarily to the Lord. But when we want the Lord in the low place, when we hope in God from that low place, that shows he's done a work of grace in us and made us his very own. And we wait for the Lord to appear. And we're saying it's only he who can really lift us up. In Pilgrim's Progress, there's the account of Christian and Pliable who set out for the celestial city, away from the city of destruction. And it's not long before they come to the slough of despond, and they both sink into this bog and into this mire, and they're struggling. It's a picture of depression and all the low experiences of the Christian life. Now, the thing is, Pliable, he struggled, but he struggled in the direction that faced the city of destruction from where he came, and eventually got himself free and went back to the city. The difference was that with Christian, he struggled in the direction of the celestial city. Struggling as he was, you see, he was right because he wasn't going back, he was going on. And one called help came along and lifted him out and set him on his feet. And so out of the depths have I cried unto thee, O Lord. And the Lord comes, and we show that we are his because we cry to him. We don't go back. Remember what Pliable said, if this is what it is to be a pilgrim toward the celestial city, you can possess the brave country alone. I'm going back. The believer, even in the morass of the darkest time, will never say that. To Lord, to whom can we go? Thou only hast the words of eternal life. So I say to you that you might be in the darkest, most wretched place, if you're still praying, and even though you might be ashamed of your prayers, the fact that you pray shows that you're alive and that you belong to God, and the Lord is mindful of you. And so that's one thing we wait for. Another thing is this: personal vindication. In Proverbs 20, verse 22, we read, "Say not thou, I will recompense evil, but wait on the Lord, and he shall save thee." And you see, it's when we are slandered or misrepresented, persecuted, it's very hard to bear. It's hardest of all to bear from the Lord's own professing people. But rather than fretfulness and resentment, it's this: wait. I wait for the Lord, for him to deal with the situation. You've got that verse in 1 Peter 3, verse 9, which is quite a telling expression that Peter uses here. And it applies to Christians who are going through the trials of persecution and being evil treated and so on. Not rendering evil for evil, not getting your own back and giving as much as you've been given, or railing for railing, not insult in reply to insults you've received, but contrariwise blessing, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing. And that word contrariwise, it sums up the difference between a believer and a non-believer. It's a different thing. It's exceptional. Contrariwise. And you see, when we experience sharp tongues like swords and wounding, desperately unkind things said or done, we wait for the Lord. We leave it with him. We don't say, I will recompense, but wait on the Lord, and he shall save thee. He'll save our reputation. He'll save what people think of us, after all. He'll save every situation. Personal vindication. It's possible for we Christians who say we believe in the sovereignty of God and the sufficiency of his care of us and all that kind of thing, to be so upset when God's own people turn against us. Well, leave God's own people to God, who will deal with his own people. And we wait upon him quietly to answer for us and vindicate us in his time and way. And isn't that liberating? Doesn't that free us? And that's another thing that we wait for. And then a third is this: the desires of our heart. In Psalm 37, verse 4, and also verse 7, we have these words, don't we? Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. And then verse 7, rest in the Lord, wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself. What are your heart's desires this morning? Well, he knows them, and he can grant them, and if they are good for you and for his glory, he will grant them in his time. But notice the psalmist goes on in verse 5, I wait for the Lord, my soul doth wait, and in his word do I hope. Because any heart's desire granted us must be in accordance with his word, mustn't it? And would you or I want anything contrary to his word, even if it were our cherished desires? And so he respects the fact that we desire these things, but he also takes into account what would be scriptural and what would be best. And God's best is worth waiting for. Set your hope in him. Beware of taking things into your own hands impatiently, getting your heart's desire quicker or in your own way. In one of the lectures to the students yesterday morning, we were looking at Genesis chapter 16 and Abraham and Hagar. Isn't it interesting? No promised heir was coming. Time was going by. They were getting older. Things were getting desperate. And so Sarai suggests to Abraham that he marry Hagar, her Egyptian handmaid, and maybe an heir will be given by her. And a boy was born, Ishmael, but he was the child of the flesh, not the son of the promise like Isaac afterwards became. But it's interesting, as we pointed out, that the temptation to take things into their own hands, as far as Abraham was concerned, it came from his wife, Sarai. She made the suggestion. Someone close to him. And if maybe a servant had suggested this method, Abraham would have backed away in horror. Because his wife made it, it seemed more legitimate, more perhaps plausible. And we must be careful, mustn't we, what we suggest to those that we are close to and what we listen to from those who are close to. It's the word of God that must dictate what's right. And the desires of our hearts must be in subjection to God's word, not eagerly snatched at because someone suggests some alternative way of getting something and quick about it. The desires of the heart, I say, it's worth waiting for. And when it comes, what a joyful thing it is. It can be received without guilt, can be received joyfully as God's own gift. I wait for the Lord, and I wait for what the Lord wants to give me. That's another thing we wait for. A fourth thing is this, the end of spiritual desertion. Psalm 8, verse 17, and I will wait upon the Lord that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him. Spiritual desertion. That's something, again, that some Christians don't think exists. If you're in darkness, God seems far away, you must be a sinner. But not at all. There is such a thing as that sovereign dealings of God with his people, whereby he temporarily withdraws the felt sense of his presence and all their comforts, so that they're left feeling alone and deserted. But it's not that he's actually abandoned them, but it's to try and prove them. And you see, I will wait upon the Lord that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him. And oh, for the return of the light of his countenance. Oh, for the coming back of his smiling face again. Just like the dark clouds are over me, but oh, the sun comes out. And oh, it's the warmth and the light and the comfort of God's felt presence again. But I say, if you're in such a state and you feel the loss and long for the Lord again, it's a proof of grace. And it won't be long before he will return, and he will be there for you as you look for him. Oh, let my trembling soul be still, while darkness veils the sky, and wait thy wise, thy holy will, wrapped yet in mystery. I cannot, Lord, thy purpose see, but all is well, since ruled by thee. Desertions are sovereignly given us, and they're sovereignly removed as well at the appointed time. And we learn things in the dark valley as we are brought out to know him even more. The end of spiritual desertion. Wait for the Lord. And then one further. It's an answer to prayer, some answer to prayer. How many times perhaps have we asked for something and God has not answered us yet? And we say with the psalmist, how long, Lord, how long? Not by way of complaint, but in honest asking. Heaven seems silent. Will this answer ever come? But delay is not necessarily denial. And if the Lord is to answer, it will be in his time. And many of the best of God's people have been kept waiting. Spurgeon, in one of his sermons, said this: if I remember rightly, there is one godly man who has been praying every day for 36 years for one thing, and recording his prayers in a book, and other believers have joined with him. Yet the answer has not come, but he as fully expects it as at first when he began to pray. That's faith. That's waiting on the Lord. I don't know how many more years it was before the answer came. We're not told. We'll never know. But there we are. I seem to recall that George Muller was interceding for the conversion of an individual. I think over 20 years he prayed for the conversion of this man and never lived to see it. But at his funeral and the committal, as his coffin was being lowered into his resting place, that man was present, and seeing the coffin brought home to him George Muller's witness, and it pleased God to save him then. Waiting for the Lord. Micah 7 verse 7, therefore I will look unto the Lord, I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. He hears us right now. But in answering, it will show that he has been hearing us in his time. And in all of this, that wonderful verse in Isaiah 30 and verse 18, and therefore will the Lord wait, that he may be gracious unto you. For the Lord is a God of judgment, meaning right decisions, perfect way. Blessed are all they that wait for him. It's a good verse to put up on the dresser, isn't it, or sideboard, or on the wall framed. Therefore will the Lord wait, that he may be gracious unto you. Blessed are all they that wait for him. A shared waiting. He only waits for the perfect time, and we wait in faith for the arrival of that perfect time. For what do we wait? Well, deliverance from the depths, personal vindication, the desires of our heart, the end of spiritual desertion, that answer to our prayer. Let's conclude with the second point. Not only for what do we wait, but how do we wait? Well, I wait for the Lord, my soul doth wait, and the rest of the verses, we will not wait in vain. You notice in verse 5, it's repeated, I wait for the Lord, my soul doth wait. Twice over, to show he's in earnest and to show that he expects that he will not wait in vain. God is the end of our waiting. David found it so in the psalm we sang earlier, Psalm 40, verses 1 and 2. I waited on the Lord, and he hearkened unto me and brought me up out of the horrible pit and from the miry clay. He didn't wait in vain. And listen to this, Isaiah 49, verse 23. They shall not be ashamed that wait for me. He'll not allow us to be embarrassed. God hasn't appeared for me. It was all in vain. What do I say? How can I include this in my witness? How is this to God's glory? They shall not be ashamed that wait for me. We shall be delighted. It'll not be in vain. It'll be to God's glory. And notice the psalmist joins watching to waiting. He says there in verse 6, my soul waiteth for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. I say more than they that watch for the morning. The picture is of a sentry on night duty, and he's looking out for the first light and the dawn and the day so that he'll be relieved and replaced on stag duty, as soldiers say. Or it could refer to something like in Acts 27, verse 29, when Paul and others were on that boat and in the storm and the near shipwreck, then fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. Oh, that the night might be over. Oh, that the morning might come. That there might be some abatement of the storm and we might see perhaps where we are then in the daylight. Wished for the day. Watching for the morning. That's the attitude, isn't it? We do not only pray and wait, but we watch and look out for God's arrival. I read an interesting little piece concerning the emancipation of the slaves in the colonies of the West Indies. In 1830 this was. And on the night before August the 1st, when that time came for their freedom, and they were to come into possession of the freedom, many of these slaves never went to bed at all. Thousands assembled, waiting for the first streak of the light of the morning of that day on which they were to be made free. Some of their number were sent to the hills, from which they might obtain the first view of the coming day, and by a signal intimate to their brethren down in the valley the dawn of the day that was to make them men and no longer mere goods and chattels, looking for the morning, watching for it. The picture is more of perhaps not so much at this time of year when the morning seems to come very quickly and it's there very soon, but perhaps the long night and the long dawn, long time for the dawn. But you see, it can be a long night. Psalm 30 verse 5, weeping may endure for a night. The dark, gloomy, fearful, endless night when nothing is happening, the Lord doesn't seem to come, prayer not answered, nothing changes, the long night, but we watch for the Lord to bring it to its close. I wait for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. You've got that word watch in Colossians 4 and verse 2. Continue in prayer and watch in the same. If you're serious about prayer and waiting on the Lord, you'll be on the lookout to see what God's going to do. Dear old Jacob in our reading earlier, when Joseph brought the two boys to him for his blessing, remember what he said? I had not thought to see thy face, and God hath showed me thy seed. What a long night of weeping. And now the dawn and the morning. I never expected to see you alive again. And I don't only see you alive again, I see your boys alive again as well. What a blessing. And Jacob didn't even watch for it because he didn't expect it. And sometimes providence springs surprises on us. And the day does come. It's a part of love, isn't it, to spring surprises? When we love someone, we'll secretly get them something and we'll put it there for them, and then they see it and they're delighted. It wouldn't have been the same if they'd been told about it, but the surprise element brings the joy because it's love. And God is pleased sometimes to surprise us with his blessing, his appearing. I had not thought to see this, and God has shown me twice, and much more besides. Watching for the morning of the blessing. Your day will come. My day will come. It's all about his mercy, isn't it? 7 and 8, look, verses 7 and 8. Let Israel hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is mercy, and with him is plenteous redemption. He shall redeem Israel from all his iniquities. You say, I'm not worthy of these things. I deserve to be forgotten and never to have my heart's desire, my prayer answered, and these other things. I'm not worthy. Well, we're not. But mercy covers it. With the Lord there is mercy and plenteous redemption. When it says there in verses 3 and 4, if thou shouldest mark iniquities, O Lord, who shall stand? There is forgiveness with thee. Someone has said, our iniquities are not marked save by the jewels of forgiveness. And this then surely will mark my hope and waiting upon him. John Flavel wrote this: the delay of your mercies is really to your advantage. The foolish child would pluck the apple whilst it is green, but when it is ripe, it drops of its own accord and is more pleasant and wholesome. And that reminds us that sometimes it's a matter of almost leaving it wholly to the Lord. The ripe apple drops by itself. And sometimes the Lord coming in for us in answer to our waiting on him patiently comes when we least expect it. And the morning arrives, and we were hardly ready for it. But what joy. Sometimes it's best in certain cases to stop looking for it, waiting for it, getting worried about it, and leave it with him. And you find that one day it's there. You'd almost forgotten about it. And the apple drops of its own accord. all the more pleasant and wholesome for that. Well, may God cause us to go up on the ascent of this psalm, and may we wait on him, give him all the glory, meanwhile, and as he comes for us with his blessing. Amen.